Well, greetings and salutations. This video is a little out of the normal for what I normally do. I guess that was redundant. I had a heck of a time trying to find anything on YouTube that describes getting and replacing the O2 sensors on an S60 Volvo. I have a 2007 S60R. It's a 2.5 liter 5-cylinder turboed motor, and all I could find was non-turbo stuff, and I needed to find something for a turbo. So we're going to go through the parts, the tools you're going to need, and locations of all this particulars for replacing O2 sensors. So come along. So I don't think I need to mention that yes, it's important to secure your vehicle with either ramps, jacks, jack stands, I should say, and always chock your wheels. One thing that seems to be helpful and almost mandatory is to take the cross brace off the back of the motor, and that just simply sits from one shock mount to the other shock mount, and then there's a bolt that goes into the top of the motor mount. You'll see it spanning across the back of the motor when you open up the hood. It's really easy to get to. There's 2 bolts on each side, and then that 1 bolt going through the motor mount, and that'll really help you get back in there, and then you don't have to wiggle your way around. Gives you a lot of access. So my Volvo has over 100,000 miles on it, and it's due for the O2 sensors. I got an intermittent code, and I forget P whatever. I'll throw that up on the screen. Anyway, even if you don't get a code, you should, after 100,000 miles, change out your O2 sensors. They will eventually fail on you, and the second thing is once they get to that 100,000 miles, they start really affecting your economy and your performance. So, and if they really go bad, they'll fail to a position where they'll go a very rich mixture, and then that screws up your catalytic converter, and then goes on from there. So not really good stuff when your O2 sensors fail. So where we're going to find these locations is going this way. So in the back of the motor, this is on the passenger side, right back in here, you can see where the tailpipe comes out. Right after the turbo, there's the sensor. That's actually easier to get to from behind, but the rest of it comes up clamps right here and follows along to the other side. And this is where it's really fun, because normally this wouldn't be really easy to get to, because it is crammed right down right below the master cylinder for the brakes, and with the fuel, the brake lines and all this other crap in here, what I found is it's a lot easier to take this little plastic cover off that normally would sit down in here. This just pops off, and you be very careful because it's all plastic, and it sits on these little expanding forks that capture it once it's in place. But once you go down in through this hole right through here, you can get right to that connector. That's probably the hardest part on the connector itself. So here's the old one, and the particular about this is that there's a little gate, I guess you call it. It's a little flip-up tab that locks in place onto these little pins on either side. So that gate flips up, allows you to take the connector loose. And what I use is kind of a more of an aircrafty kind of, we call this a skin spoon, but really any really thin bladed tool that can get up underneath that gate and prise. That's if you're English or Canadian, prise. You want to just flip up that gate, and this will simply just pop right back off. This nut, this flange, is a 22 millimeter, but a 7/8 will fit it. So take that for what it's worth. And normally this one actually broke when I took it apart, but on the back side here, the new one will have these little push pins like you find on the interior of your car. So what I used was a really long pry bar and just got in there and literally snapped it off. So have fun putting that one back in there, because it's really far back in there and you got to jam your arm all the way through that hole, and that's probably the hardest part of the front one. The second one is actually behind on top of the catalytic converter, and you'll have to go underneath definitely have to go underneath the car to get to that one. But for the most part, you can do the front one from the top. It is a lot easier to go up underneath and go through a very large hole that's in between all the structure. One thing to note when putting the new one back in is I pulled the pigtail all the way through the subframe and out over the control arm. You're going to try and keep that cable as straight as possible when you're starting to thread that O2 sensor in there. It just helps that that cable, kind of with the heat shield and everything, kind of tries to fight you when you try to go back in. In the center of the vehicle, about where the front seats are at, right below that is that sensor. And then when you follow the cable forward, you'll want to follow it forward, and just underneath the aft subframe is the connector. So this one's pretty straightforward, other than trying to get to that. It's possible, so just take your time. So that wraps up the overview of replacing the O2 sensors on a 2007 Volvo S60R.